Now we'll talk about context in critical discourse analysis. Before I move on to the details of a context, I would like to share with you, dear students, that context is one of the primary tools to analyze a text in critical discourse analysis. The more we are moving towards the critical analysis of discourses or various texts, the more we are delving deep into the understanding of a context. Now, the overall understanding of a context is not reduced to the physical features we live in or physical boundaries we live in. Rather, it has become deeper and it involves many other socio-political, cultural, personal, and sometimes even cognitive or mental ideas. In the beginning, I'll just introduce you to the definitions and various characterizations of a context, which are being used by various approaches of critical discourse analysis these days. I'll define the concept in the beginning of context, and then we'll move on to the various aspects of a context. If you just see on your screens, there are many scholars who have defined context. For example, Blumet defines context as the totality of conditions under which a certain discourse is produced, reproduced, or enacted or distributed in the society. So it is the overall view, overall collection of all kinds of conditions which might constitute the production and then enactment, or we can say distribution of a certain kind of discourse. Similarly, we can see that Von Dijk defines context as a combination of various factors which stimulate a person to produce a certain kind of discourse. These factors include cognitive, social, political, cultural, and historical environments. So, all these factors usually are understood to influence the making of a certain discourse. Therefore, they are considered to be important factors in understanding the meaning of a discourse. Then there have been various characteristics of a context which has been discussed by multiple authors in various forms of writing based on critical discourse analysis. The early approaches in CDA used, and in discourse analysis also, used some metaphors to define context instead of stating it straight away. For example, Goodwin and Durante adopt the metaphor of figure as text, and the element of ground as context. So ground is something which is the background, or could be seen as a context, in which as one figure which is standing down there may be seen as a text. So text needs to be interpreted in the light of that overall ground, and in order to do that, we need to see his positioning in the ground. Is he standing in the middle or somewhere else? And there could be many other factors which we would probably look into in order to interpret the overall understanding of the meaning. Then there have been many researchers who have been focusing on the levels of context, maybe macro context, micro context, internal context, external context. So there has been multiple manifestations of the term context in critical discourse analysis. For example, we can say Halliday and Hassan, they have been distinguishing between various aspects of a context. For example, they distinguished between text, co-text, which is a text combining with the text we are analyzing. So a text does not happen in isolation, rather it is combined by other segments of a text. So the segments of a text which surround the particular text you are investigating, they would be called co-text. Then there can be slightly broader context of situation in which that particular text has happened or has been produced. Similarly, the context of culture, the overall broader socio-political culture in which certain things happen. We all know that certain values, norms in a particular culture may be interpreted differently, and the same values or things may be interpreted in an entirely different way in another culture. So overall broader socio-political culture has a bearing on the meaning also. Therefore, they are considered to be an important component of a context. Wodak includes in her model of context the other texts and discourses also, besides the factors we have already discussed. Ruth Wodak, she included some intertextual factors also. Other discourses or text which has been produced about the same topic or similar topics may be relevant to interpret the meaning also. For example, in certain topics, there could be some series of discussion going on. Let's say, if we look at the topic about Islamophobia these days, we can see that the discourse is being produced about this particular topic in all corners of the world these days. Therefore, we can utilize the discourse being produced everywhere to reach a certain to reach a certain conclusive meaning, and that's what Wodak hints towards, that we need to see various particular features of other texts which are related to the text under investigation. Then the conditions of text production, distribution, and reception, how it is received by a certain audience, they are also called a context. A text is generally produced in a certain environment, and it is possible that it may be received in a different environment. Let's say we have a beautiful song, a romantic song being produced by a certain company somewhere, but that song cannot be received in the same sense when there is a sad situation in a family. So you cannot play that song in that situation. So we have to see not only the elements of production, but also the elements of reception in order to understand the context in its entirety. Then the wider socio-political context, according to Flardew, are also very important. I have already talked about it, that they actually shape and sometimes have a strong influence on the overall making of the meaning. Then text and context are generally they contribute to each other in order to make us reach to certain meanings. They are mutually reflexive. And what do we mean by that? That text influences context and context influences text, which implies that both actually contribute to each other and help us develop certain meanings out of a particular text or discourse. Analysis, according to this view, involves a continual shunting between text and context. So any analysis of meaning of a particular discourse would involve a continuous reaching between text and context. We will read a text and that see in which context it was produced, and then we will know the context and we will try to see what has been said in this context. So both contribute to each other on a regular basis, and sometimes this shift from context to text and text to context is so rapid that we do not understand that are we dealing with the context or the text. However, this shifting from both these elements helps us to reach proper meanings of a discourse. The process by which a text and context come together in the creation of certain meaning is the contextualization. Contextualization is the element which helps us to reach certain meanings in a particular way. It contextualizes a certain text in a certain socio-political situation, and we try to interpret meanings in that situation. Similarly, this contextualization involves a K factor, which is the mutual knowledge of the hearer and the listener. If the knowledge is mutual and mutually understandable, we can make something out of a communication. Otherwise, it might lead to communication. So the knowledge, conveyance of knowledge, which may be personal, social, political, and understanding of the knowledge by both the parties who are involved in a kind of discourse or sharing is very important. Otherwise, we might lead to a kind of communicative misunderstanding. We also need to understand that context is not static, it is not fixed somewhere, it is dynamic, it keeps on changing, including the physical context. It keeps on changing because its situation, its timing keeps on changing. Then context is also negotiated between the participants in a discourse, and it really depends on their mental models, what kind of thinking is going through while they're producing a certain kind of text. When the thinking or mental models change, the context or its importance also changes. Therefore, context in many cases is negotiated also, so it's not fixed, rather it is dynamic. Power is also following focus philosophy. Power is also an important element of context because it helps us to interpret many meanings of various kinds of discourse, especially in the domain of critical discourse analysis. Similarly, intertextuality is a factor of context. It helps us to relate a text with the previous or similar text produced at the same time, and therefore it helps us to reach some reasonable meanings of a text, or it helps us to conduct a deep analysis of a text. And the last, I would like to share that identity, which generally it is not assumed to be a part of context, is also is a factor of context in recent studies of critical discourse analysis. Identity is something what we believe we are, or others believe what we are. So what kind of opinion we have about others or about ourselves always have a strong effect on our meaning making process. So our image of ourselves or of others would always affect our understanding of the discourses of others and our own also. Therefore, identity may also be considered as an important factor of context in critical discourse analysis studies.